Let's recap what we've already went through. We're in the prelude stages still prior to collapse, which people will say came out of nowhere. But we've pointed out the cracks we're living through right now and how they were poured into the foundation decades ago. When money got cheap, when risk got subsidized, when credit became the oxygen nobody thought about because it was always there. We lived through decades where debt wasn't just financing the economy. Cheap credit became the lifeblood of the economy. Consumption on installments, corporations on buybacks, governments on deficits so large they started to feel like a natural resource. Cheap credit made everyone feel rich. Zero rates made every asset look brilliant. Liquidity made every bad idea look inevitable. But credit is like muscle fiber. It works when the system trusts itself. It tears when stress returns, and it collapses when the load is bigger than the backbone, which it clearly is. So that's where we are now. The world is gonna hit a wall, not because charts failed, not because people got scared, but because the entire era was built on an assumption that interest would never have a cost again. Rates move a few percentage points and the entire structure starts coughing. Households will feel it. Corporations will feel it. Banks will feel it. And unlike last time, nation states feel it. See, you can bail out corporations, banks, and households with public money, but the government can't bail itself out. And so when the credit system cracks, meaning the risk-free asset of treasury starts to feel more like a meme coin, everyone will realize that credit isn't optional. Credit is civilization. The timeline between effort and reward, risk and return, today and tomorrow. When credit falters, production slows, trust evaporates, and economies fall back into barter thinking. Short-term, survival mode, defensive, and when credit markets seize, governments panic, central banks improvise with no music. Liquidity gets sprayed like a fire hose, stability becomes theater, and at the edges, outside the spotlight, people start using alternatives, networks, protocols, parallel credit systems that don't depend on the moods of committees or the fragility of over-levered balance sheets. That's why this chapter matters. Because once the old world's credit structure breaks, the next structure doesn't rise from policy. It rises from necessity, from people who need to trust someone, somewhere, without permission. This is where decentralized credit is born. So before we talk about the new world, we recap the moment the old one buckles. And that's where track one begins.
Just a reminder, this bubble was bred from debt. Rates rise once, and the market forgets. Every asset leaning on leverage and mess. So when yield curve talk, that's margin sweat. Yeah, price ain't strength, it's faith on display. Liquidity tide just hit decay. Printer asleep, now gravity pray. Whole street learn cost the sober way. Look, they built a house on discounted cash. Now discount vanish, bricks turn ash. Debt stay heavy, assets crash. Jobs fold quick like options flash. You can't taper belief, you can't paper grief. Confidence crack once rates got teeth. Central bank priests lose doctrine sheets. Sermons sound off when the math repeat. They call it soft landing, please. It's a no-bid bid, it's deflated dreams. Print a return like it caught disease. QE drip like IV fees. Yeah, every policy patch a placebo. Economy wheeze, they blame the people. But stimulus only delay the sequel. Debt compounding, that plot ain't legal. Okay, now assets sink, debt won't drown. Credit spreads hum, that funeral sound. Collateral melt, faith not found. Recession's the echo of leverage unwound. Look, this ain't collapse, it's compression. Physics, too much yield, not enough witness. They thought infinite growth was logistics. Now every bond trader turned mystic. Cash fleet slow to the few who see. Banks gate funds, print policy. Inflation tax, turn robbery. Stability now means poverty. System brittle, can't raise without break. Confidence gone, no trust to fake. They'll spin that dial till the circuit shake. Then blame retail for the mess they make. Yeah, when trust decay, code start speaking. Fiat leak while nodes stay breathing. Old world wheezing, new rails deep, and permissionless money the valve for these. be leaking. So we ain't fleeing, we firm and stance. Let them dance, that liquidity dance. Compression, building this chains advance. Pressure made diamond, now watch it enhance.
Before we talk about decentralized credit, before we talk about real on-chain coordination, we have to clean up the intellectual junkyard this industry has been living in. Because crypto didn't just inherit bad economics, it imported every misunderstanding people had about money and credit and then added cosplay. Somewhere along the way, security theater turned into ideology and self-isolating became a virtue. People started acting like hibernation was a strategy, they called it sovereignty. But it was just solitude with brand, and a whole culture grew around the idea that if everyone hoards and nobody trusts, somehow a thriving economy appears out of thin air. As if society is optional, coordination is optional, credit is optional. But credit isn't a side quest. Credit is the mechanism that turns individual effort into collective lift, and yet this space treats lending like sin, leverage like heresy, risk like contamination. They act like the world collapsed because credit existed, not because it was monopolized, corrupted, captured by institutions that privatized the gains and socialized the losses. So before we build something better, we have to talk about what's broken in the narrative itself. The myth that custody equals competence, the myth that friction equals freedom, the myth that hoarding equals sovereignty, the myth that independence means isolation, the myth that an economy can grow when every participant tries to be an island. It doesn't work. It never has. It never will. A million self-banks don't make a marketplace, they make a morgue for idle capital that never meets another human being, and that's why the next track matters. Because you can't propose a better architecture until you dismantle the fantasies holding this one together. This isn't about attacking people, it's about clearing the fog so the real structure, the real future can finally be seen. Alright? Let's talk myths.
Yeah. Crept amongst preaching monk could, but they ain't built for monasteries. Look, I'm patient, but honestly, y'all sound like toddlers with hardware wallets, chanting sovereign like it's cosplay, talking about be your own bank when you can't even balance a day. This whole scene postures, pure ostrich, head buried in cold storage like savings gon' grow by osmosis. You hoard dust, call it discipline, but lock capital don't compound, it just fossilizes. That ain't sovereignty, that's solitude grim. They confuse custody with competence, think friction is freedom, think keys make them kings. But a vault without vision is just a tomb you live in. No lending, no leverage, no lift, that's not liberation. It's lifelessness, economy amputated at the wrist. And the myth they preach, anti-economic, anti-growth, anti-world. Whole crowd built like prepper blogs with ledger logo. Same logic as mattresses stuffed with cash. Zero trust, zero yield, zero chance. Saving for a future they refuse to build. Banking ain't the villain, state capture is. It wasn't credit that failed, it was coercion wrapped as policy. Politics playing puppeteer with the cost of money. Inflation is background radiation, y'all mad at the wrong monster. Pooling capital is how humans climb. You remove that, you remove progress. No bridges, no factories, no farms before harvest. Just cold stacks, cold fear, cold logic. The dead religion of self-isolation, and you flexing sovereign with a wallet colder than your worldview. Starving the very system that would have fed you. Calling paralysis prudence, calling distrust principle is delusion dressed as discipline. If nobody trusts nobody, nobody builds anything. And a million self-banks don't make an economy, they make a graveyard of vital capital, waiting on a miracle that never matures. Truth is, sovereignty ain't a bunk, it's coordinations. Risk share, value pooled, lending without change, credit without capture, trust without tyranny. But y'all don't want sovereignty, y'all want solitude, cause you mistook isolation for insurance. And that's why you stay poor, stay small, staring at your cold storage like it's a crystal ball. The future ain't be your own bank, it's build a better one on chain. Pseudonymous, uncaptured, everything else is fantasy. So gonna miss, uncaptured, everything else fantasy.
Everything else is fantasy, sold by influencers who never built a thing but a bunker full of coke.
The last track was about the myth of isolation. This one is about the myth that built the entire modern world. The idea that money and credit are the same thing. They're not. Never were. But the lie has survived long enough to feel like truth. It's not an accident. It's an incentive. Governments needed a narrative that blamed banks for inflation, so they blurred the lines. Banks were happy to accept the blame, because the blur made their credit products feel like money and the public went along with it. Because nobody wants to feel like they're holding an IOU instead of actual settlement. That confusion isn't a bug, it's the operating system. You say money supply, but 90% of what you're measuring is promises, obligations. Claims on claims built on layers of future hope. Actual money, the kind that ends arguments, the kind that settles without permission, is a tiny fraction of the charts everyone worships. Credit moves the most, but credit is not payment, it's deferral. And when you confuse the two, you create a world where everything looks liquid until the moment it isn't. But here's the real tragedy. Crypto inherited the same lie. Lightning sold as money scaling. Stablecoin issuers calling IOUs cash. Layer 2s marketed as sovereign money rails, while they literally route debt promises through committees. Everyone in the space selling credit insists their credit is money because admitting the trade-offs would slow adoption and shrink profits. So they say it's the same, they say it's seamless, they say the IOU is indistinguishable from the asset. But finality is not a marketing slogan, it's physics. And every cycle ends the same way, with people discovering painfully that credit depends on trust, and trust depends on truth, and truth depends on settlement. If you get that wrong, you get everything wrong. And that's why the next track matters, because to build a real decentralized credit system, you have to understand the difference between money and the promises built on top of it. Alright, let's tear down the biggest myth of them all. Alright, let's tear down the biggest myth of them all.
Yeah. They say money supply, but me and IOUs. Claims on claims, stack debt abuse. What you spend ain't final, it's loops in use. Settlement fake, illusion loose. Yeah, you ain't paid, you just passed the tab. Some legend nods say balance grab, but base layer truth still held by cab. Fed swift, clearinghouse slab. Look, money ends argument, credit just talk. You settle with one, with the other you walk. Banks write promises, states just chalk. Numbers move, but nothing unlocked. They call it creation, I call it disguise. Extend new loans, inflate old lies. Money multiply, old priests cry. Faith-based math and paper ties. They say banks print to hide the hand. Shift blame down where citizens stand. But mint and mandate still command inflation tax from the ruling brand. Yeah, money's metal cold, a sweat it clear. Credit's a whisper of future near. When both confused, collapse appear. Cause promise outrun what's really here. Okay, physical settle, a proof of work done. That's finality, no rerun. Everything else a IOU spun. Claim on claim till default's begun. Look, real money scarce, credit grow fast. Paper expand, trust don't last. Liquidity flash like shadow cast till borrower broke, lender aghast. That's the fraud, call leverage faith. Dress time decay and sovereign grace. When repayment fade, they print and replace. Lie labeled stimulus, theft and base. You think you're rich when digits shine, but wealth ain't credit, it's claim in line. When lines get long, you see design. Liquidity promises serpentine. Yeah, the difference subtle but true severe. Money's the root, credit veneer. They merge the two to keep you unclear, but that veil thin when the cycle smears. So next crash come, remember the split. Credit default, money legit. Trust unwind where the lies emit and finality rise. That's sovereign grit.
Now that we've separated money from credit, it's time to face the next uncomfortable truth. Most of what crypto calls credit isn't credit at all. It can't be. Not because the technology is bad, but because the economy underneath the money is missing. Credit only works when people borrow to produce, to plant a harvest, to expand a business, to build something that pays tomorrow because it generates value today. But crypto never had that. Not yet. There's no broad base of goods demanded in the money, no meaningful flow of wages, commerce, production, or output denominated in the chain itself. And without that, there is no foundation for lending because there is nothing real to fund. So what happened instead? A generation of builders started selling credit products without an economy, derivatives without production, promises without purpose. And because profit incentives distort narratives, every one of them swore their IOUs were just as good as the asset, that their credit layer carried no trade-offs, that their yields came from innovation instead of dilution or speculation. It's the same lie fiat use. It just wears different merch. People thought the Lightning Network solved money. They thought L2 solved settlement. They thought yield solved adoption, but none of it solved the only problem that matters. Credit can't be real until the money escapes the casino and enters the economy. That doesn't happen when you integrate with banks. It doesn't happen when stablecoins mimic the dollar, and it definitely doesn't happen when chains build credit primitives before they build actual demand. Crypto won't have real credit until it separates from traditional rails, survives the crash that reveals the cost hidden in fiat, and then grows from nothing. The way every monetary system always has. That's why the next track exists, not to be cruel, not to dunk on people, but to expose the gap between what they're selling and what's possible. Until the underlying economy exists, every lending market in crypto isn't credit. It's choreography, it's speculation wearing a tie, it's casino logic wrapped in smart contracts. Alright, let's walk into the circus and call the tricks what they really are.
Yeah.
Y'all keep calling this credit, but I'm looking at a wasteland of leverage, stacked on leverage, like a Jenga tower built by kindergarteners with Red Bull shakes. This ain't lending, it's a carnival of exit liquidity masquerading as innovation. Every protocol bragging about yield, but nobody can answer the only question that matters: where's it come from?
I don't know, bro. Number go up?
Exactly, a whole ecosystem of PhDs, hedge funds, institutions with marble lobbies and televised panels all high on their own supply. Can't do first grade economics. Yield only exists when production exists, and ain't nobody borrowing stable coins to build a factory, plan a season, a scale of business. They borrow to gamble harder. That's it, that's the whole sector. DeFi credit markets look sophisticated cause they use big words, but peel the skin back. It's Ponzi stacked on the insecurity of influencers who needed you to think they were geniuses cause their identity broke before the chain did. Protocols pay yields with emissions, which is just Latin for we printing monopoly money and hoping you don't notice the dilution. And yeah, I know some of you got offended when I said it's all bullshit, but tell me this: if a platform pays 20% and nobody in that system is producing $1 of new value, what do you think is happening? You're milking the next fool, you're the yield, you just don't know it yet. Look, I ain't even mad at retail. They were lied to. Influencers turned finance into astrology, made a career out of circusing around TV screens with laser eyes and borrowed conviction. What pisses me off is when institutions
actual asset managers
fall for the same first grade logic. People with terminal degrees who think you can innovate away fundamental economic laws. Even Sailor out here offering yield on Bitcoin, bro. Yield on what? Bitcoin doesn't cash flow, it doesn't produce. You can wrap it in 12 layers of accounting, and it still don't magically transform into a productive asset. But that's what a bubble does. It makes everyone stupid the same way. At the same time, they all think economic laws evaporate just cause the tech is shiny, as if every new invention didn't still sit on the same ancient pillars that built every civilization. We know production, coordination, time preference, risk. Crypto ain't mature yet cause nobody's using it to move value through time productively, not cause the chains are broken, cause the culture is. This is still the casino era.
And casinos don't print yield, they print invoices for the slowest players in the room. You want real credit, you need real purpose, something with a return. That ain't just the next sucker buys high. Until then, stop calling this ecosystem a lending market. It's a speculative daycare with grown men eating glue and calling it Aper.
Now that we've torn apart the myth of crypto credit, we can talk about the next trap this space fell into: overcollateralization. And let's be honest, crypto didn't choose overcollateralization because it was wise or elegant or future-proof. It chose it because it was scared. Scared of volatility, scared of the casino culture it built, scared of defaults, scared of trusting anyone it couldn't see. So instead of building trust, it built walls, thick ones. Systems where you lock up 150 to borrow 100 and call it innovation. That's not credit, that's not growth, that's not how economies scale. It's insurance against the fact that nothing real is being produced underneath. It's a fail-safe for a society that doesn't yet believe in itself. And it makes sense, because credit requires future value. And crypto hasn't built the economic backbone for future value yet. There are no massive flows of goods denominated on-chain, no large-scale commerce, no wage cycles, no production that lives and dies in the native currency. Without that, what's left? Price feeds, collateral vaults, risk reduced to volatility charts instead of the character of the borrower. But here's the truth nobody likes saying: over-collateralization is not a feature. It's a symptom. A sign that the system hasn't created enough trust to take real risk. You can't build a civilization if everyone must prove they can pay back the loan before they receive it. Traditional finance didn't win because it had more laws or more glass towers. It won because it learned how to price trust, coordinate production, and lend to people building tomorrow. Crypto won't beat that system by offering higher rates, higher risk, and higher collateral requirements. It'll win when it offers lower rates, when its risk models are smarter, when pseudonymous identities carry decades of earned credibility, when the economy underneath the chain is strong enough that people borrow to build, not to speculate. That's what the pseudonymous shell is for. That's what economic platforms are for. That's what breaks the monopoly of the state. Not bigger vaults, not tighter margins, not higher collateral. Trust, reputation, real output, a real market for tomorrow. Until then, every lending market in this space is just a padded room for capital too nervous to step outside. Alright, let's talk about the collateral cage and why this space trapped itself inside it.
Yeah, they keep calling this lending, but that ain't what's happening. This is pawn shop finance dressed up in candy-colored dashboards. Ain't nobody building factories out here to swapping leverage like poke cards in a food court. You can't scale an economy on 1 to 50% collateral. That ain't credit, that's a hostage negotiation. Lock your coins in the basement just to get $50 upstairs. What genius thinks that funds production. Crypto out here cosplaying as Wall Street, but it's all mirrors. Every loan we got is just leverage recursion with a DeFi skin suit stretched over it. They keep preaching yield, but ask them where it comes from. Watch their pupils dilate like they seen a ghost. No revenue, no enterprise, no production curve, just a long chain of dumber termites chewing through each other's savings, thinking they're building a cathedral. That ain't credit, that's a Ponzi parade with better UI. You can't coordinate society by lending against vapor and hoping the music don't stop. You can't build future value on a system where every borrower is just taking 11th bet on a chart they don't understand. Over-collateralization is a graveyard, a mausoleum for capital too scared to be useful. This whole space is allergic to real risk. Everybody wants sovereignty without skin in the game, freedom without without responsibility, credit without the possibility of someone actually defaulting. You can't build civilization like that. Credit is a bet on the future, not a bet on a price feed. Crypto keeps bragging like it reinvented finance, but what it actually built is a margin casino with a savings account cosplay layer on top of it. No economy in history scaled off collateral alone. Collateral backs trust, it does not replace it. Collateral is an assist. Now the architecture when collateral becomes the only way to lend. You haven't built a credit system, you built a padded room for people afraid of reality. Over-collateralization ain't the future, it's training wheels for a market that ain't learned how to walk yet. Yeah.
Before you point fingers at crypto, ask why the need never showed up. This ecosystem ain't immature cause the devs were dumb or the builders were lazy. It stayed juvenile cause fiat trust was still on clearance. For decades the legacy system ran on training wheels made at zero rates. QE and a global confidence hallucination so strong it made even bad ideas look functional. When trust is cheap, innovation stays decorative. Ain't nobody reaching for sovereignty when the cage feels comfortable. Look, fiat credit was a cheat code for 30 years straight. Cost of capital, free risk, socialized defaults. Political failure is papered over before sunrise hit the East Coast. The whole system was propped up like a movie set with debt behind every door frame and illusion behind every spreadsheet. In that world, why would decentralized credit grow? Why would pseudonymous markets emerge? Why would anyone build trustless finance when you could swipe a card and borrow against assets inflated by the same machine printing your bailout? Crypto ain't behind, fiat is overgrown. A bloated giant held up by policy, duct tape and belief management professionals on Bloomberg headsets. And as long as that system kept pretending to be stable, crypto was doomed to be a toy sandbox, a speculation simulator, a side quest for people who hadn't yet felt the cost of the whole world cracking. But here's a part nobody's pricing in. The moment the bond guys finally sober up and see the inflation monster that's been chewing on their ankles for a decade straight. Cause right now these dudes still think treasuries are some kind of safe haven sanctuary, a holy temple of risk-free returns cute. Wait till they realize that every future payment is denominated in monopoly. Run off from a Fed that's about to hit QE on God mode just to keep the roof from caving in. Imagine holding a promise for dollars in 2024 when the printer's about to cough up more supply in 6 months than it did in the last cycle combined. Safe haven now, that's a melting ice cube wrapped in patriotism. They gonna find out quick to lend into a bankrupt empire ain't a sanctuary. It's a risk asset masquerading as grandma's savings account. And the pivot's gonna be violent. From flight to safety to holy shit, get me out on one chart pattern. That's the spark, that's the match, that's the moment fiat trust goes from discounted to unaffordable. And the only thing left is sovereignty or drowning in crypto. The real crypto, not your influencer casinos, not your VC exit scams, the settlement layer chains built for survival. They gonna rise out the smoke like the thing they always were before the clowns were painted it. Nobody sees this macro catalyst. Swear to God I don't know why they even here. Everybody high on tokenomics fumes, forgetting the whole point was an exit door from a burning building. But hey, the lesson's coming. Reality's a better teacher than any white paper. And when it hits your ETFs, your bond ladders, your diversified portfolios, all gonna look like religious artifacts from a civilization that forgot math. But don't get it twisted, it don't mean Bitcoin moonwalks the minute treasuries crack. Nah, the casino gotta collapse for speculative premiums don't ascend, they detonate. Price gotta fall back down to meet the utility curve it left behind years ago. Bitcoin's trading like sovereign money that never actually got used. It's priced like it replaced the dollar, but acts like it replaced a Chuck E. Cheese token dispenser. Monetization don't sprint, it limps, it crawls, it grows only as fast as actual usage does. And right now the usage curve flatlines like a patient nobody bothered to resuscitate. This market sold itself a fantasy. Price goes up and adoption follows. Nah, that's toddler logic, cargo cult economics. You can pump belief, but you can't pump necessity. And Bitcoin's sitting at the highest disconnect between valuation and monetary demand in its entire damn history. That gap has to close, it will close. And when it does, the rinse cycle gonna make 2018 look like a pregame stretch. Only after the mania rots out, after the grifters get drained, after price remembers utility ain't a vibe. That's when real monetization catches up to the myth people kept reciting. You gotta understand, for decentralized credit to emerge, the incumbent must fail first. Every revolution follows the same math. The new thing only grows when the whole thing becomes unusable. As long as the banking rail's still cleared, as long as interest stays suppressed, as long as governments kept volatility quarantined, crypto had no reason to get serious. We didn't dodge a mission, we were waiting for the storm.
Cause when fiat trust is cheap, people ignore alternatives. But when fiat trust becomes expensive, when borrowing breaks the borrower, when saving gets punished, when money itself fractures, sovereignty stops being ideology and becomes survival.
Value doesn't grow by sitting still. It doesn't bloom in a cold wallet or multiply just because someone hoards it. It grows when someone brave takes the risk you won't. When a builder reaches forward into time and turns today's saved breath into tomorrow's living world.
Everybody hates banks till they need a bridge built, or a farm planted, or a dream funded. Funny how that works. Credit is civilization, that's the line that's scared to say. Y'all worship cold storage like progress sprung from a seed you never paid. No lending, no future, no trade. Economies die in the dark when everybody's clutching grenades. You think corruption came from credit, nah, corruption came from capture. Crown snatched the balance sheet, turned risk into rapture for the ruling class after fiat inflated the fate, not the function. Lending ain't evil, it's the state distortion that turned markets into puppets. Look, credit is time travel, pull tomorrow in and out so builders can build. That's why farms grow before harvest and cities rise from steel. You remove that, welcome to the Stone Age, friend. Hard money with a hard stop, a world where nothing scales and everybody guards scraps like guards dogs of their own rot. Bitcoin maximalists act like trust is taboo, like everyone should stand alone on an island praying the tide don't move. But trust is how humans cheat entropy, trade risk, share tools, create surplus bigger than what one man could do. A million sovereign atoms don't form a galaxy, they form debris. It ain't noble, it's noise, no coordination, no choice. A future of empty wallets singing the same paranoid voice. Credit is collaboration with teeth, the skin in the game, not state police. It's capital signing a contract that says I believe you lead. After you build what feeds us both, that's mutual risk, the opposite of the fiat choke. But y'all conflated lenders with tyrants cause you grew up in a world where the state play referee with a loaded badge. You confuse guns with agreements, confuse coercion with cash. But in a trustless system, credit don't need cops. It needs collateral code and consequences that drop automatically. No middlemen propping up the plot. This is civilization and shackle finance without the priesthood. Capital flowing on merit, not on whether your last name looks good on a bureau's ledger or some bankers move. Crypto won't win cause it's our money, it'll win cause it builds new trust. Without borders, without judge, without blood. Credit is the spine of growth and blockchains give it lungs. The future ain't holding, it's lending without change. That's civilization. And the ones who grasped that early will own the next domain.
Look,
If you remember anything from this whole journey, remember this. Money and credit are not the same thing. Money ends the argument. Money settles the score. Money is final. Credit is a promise that ain't done yet. And every bank in history has tried to sell the lie that their promises are just as good as the asset. That's the first scam you gotta see through. Cause when you believe credit is money, you believe bubbles are wealth, you believe risk is optional, you believe the marketing pitch that every balance sheet salesman rehearsed before they ever shook your hand. But here's the cold truth. Before credit can orbit a money, that money must first anchor the economy. Real goods, real wages, real commerce. Crypto skipped that step. It built lending before demand, debt before purpose, risk before production. So everything blew up exactly the way it had to. Not because the tech is weak, but because the economy underneath isn't built yet. And all the bank-friendly narratives you heard out here, the Bitcoin on Wall Street bedtime stories, those were profit pitches, a way to sanitize sound money into a product Wall Street could flip while the crowd chanted victory.
But a settlement layer doesn't become sovereignty by bowing to the system it replaced. Monetization comes first, credit comes only after a currency actually matters. And for decentralized credit to be real, there's one more thing we need: identity without exposure, reputation without permission, a history you earn, not a brand you buy. Pseudonymous scoreboards where your record is visible but your face stays yours. That's how trust forms without the state attached. That's how lending becomes collaboration, not surveillance. And none of that unlocks until the old world cracks, until interest spikes and faith collapses and people finally see the cost of decades spent printing illusions and calling them stability when survival demands sovereignty. That's when these rails matter. Not because influencers preached it, not because politicians approved it, but because there's nowhere left to hide. And if we get this right, if we build tools that fund production, not speculation, if we create markets that reward contribution, not extraction, and credit gets cheaper, risk gets smaller, and people stop gambling it exists. That's the real finish line, a system that works because the people inside it do. We're not there yet, not even close, but there is a path, a real one. Nobody's gonna walk it for you, not a crypto influencer, not a VC, not a nation state holding a bailout button. Sovereignty isn't granted, it's learned, it's earned individually. So when that storm hits and the old promises melt, remember these tracks, remember what's signal and what's theater, and choose the rail that settles in truth. Because everything else, everything that depends on trust without deserving it, that's what fails next. That's what fails next.